This is note taker 5 on what is life. In this note taker, we will take a look at the 6 characteristics that a thing must have to be considered living. And then once we determine that something is living, we will look at the needs that are required to stay living. The study of living things is called biology. If you look at the word wall in the classroom, bio means life, and anytime you see an ending that's ology, that means the study of. Now, when we determine that something is considered living, that living thing is called an organism. We'll be using this word many, many times throughout the year in class. So, to be considered a living organism, there are 6 important characteristics that you have to have, and we will look at these and the examples of them on the following slides. Now, there is one very important point I do need to make about living things versus non-living things. If you are something that is dead, that does not mean that you are a non-living thing. Non-living means you never were, you aren't, and you will never be living. Living things can be alive, or they can have passed and they are now dead, but they were at one point considered living. The first characteristic a living thing must have is cellular organization. All living things are going to be made of cells. Some living things are made up of only one cell. They're going to be called unicellular. Again, you can refer to the word wall in the classroom and you will see that the prefix uni means one. So if you're unicellular, you're one cell, you're not going to be able to be seen without a microscope, and your one cell must carry out all the life functions that are important for you to live. The other type of organism is called multicellular, and the word wall in the classroom, the prefix multi means many. So if you're multicellular, you're made up of many cells. And if you are multicellular, like we are as people, each of your cells plays an important role and has a special job to perform. The good thing is when you look at a multicellular organism, all of our cells that make us up, which for a human that's about 20 trillion cells, they don't all have to do everything, all jobs that are needed to keep us alive. In this slide, we have 2 pictures. The top one is of an amoeba. It is a unicellular organism, meaning made of one cell. It is water-dwelling and belongs to the kingdom Protist, and it is something we will be studying third 9 weeks. But this organism, being of only one cell, it is microscopic, which means you cannot see it without a microscope, but that one cell is responsible for carrying out all of its life functions. The bottom picture is a tiger, and like you, it is a multicellular organism made of many, many cells, each specialized to do their own job. The second characteristic of life is that you are made up of the chemicals of life, and there are quite a few chemicals we're going to talk about. The most abundant, or the one that you have the most of in your body, is going to be water. Carbohydrates are another chemical that we are made up of if you're living. That is your energy source. So if you are someone who is a runner, if you run a marathon, the night before you eat lots and lots of carbs to build up your energy for the run the next day. Proteins and lipids are going to be your building materials. They're the building blocks. Your proteins you can get from meats, things like that. Your lipids is a fancy word for fats, but there are good lipids and there are bad lipids. And then the last chemical that all living things will have are nucleic acids, and this is your genetic material. This carries a special code that makes you the way you are. And second 9 weeks, we'll be studying genetics, and we'll talk a lot more about nucleic acids then. But you may have actually heard of DNA. All living things have DNA. The Na in that stands for nucleic acid. The third characteristic of life is that all living things do use energy. You need to now understand where that energy comes from, and we're going to see that on the next slide. But when we talk about plants and animals, two largest groups that we have, your plants are going to get their energy through photosynthesis, and we'll be talking more about that on the next note taker 6. Animals, we get our energy from eating. Now, does anybody know where all the energy comes from? If you guessed the sun, you are correct. The sun is where all of the energy on the earth comes from, and we get it in different ways. Plants absorb it directly and use it in the process of photosynthesis to make their food source. That food source is actually a sugar, which is a carbohydrate. And then you have these lovely cows in the field who are grazing on the grass. So the grass gets the sun's energy directly, the cows eat the grass, and that's how they get the sun's energy. And us as humans, well, if you eat a salad, you get it directly from the plant, or if you eat the cow, you get it from the cow that ate the grass that got the energy from the sun. The fourth characteristic of life is going to be growth and development. All living things are going to grow and they're going to develop. And these words actually have two very different meanings. To grow is the process of getting larger. To develop, you're actually going to change. You can change both physically, your body can change its look, and you can also change on the inside. You can change mentally. You also have mental development, which is how our brain develops in different stages. Now, to be able to grow and develop, we have to go back to that all living things do use energy. So examples of some growth and development in living things, and you can write these in your notes. Plants start as a seed, and then they grow into a flower, or they grow into a tree. And that tree or that flower does not look like that seed. So not only did it get bigger, but it also changed and developed. Animals, we start off in a baby stage, and then we move to toddler, then teens, to adults. Here's an example of growth and development in a person. Again, we start as a baby. Not only do we grow larger, but our body does change a little bit as we go from baby to toddler. And then from toddler to young adult here, you can see she's on her lovely cell phone, like most of you are most of the time. You can see she's grown larger from the baby picture, but she's also developed, changed. Here's a drawing of a seed becoming a plant. You can see that the final plant looks nothing like the seed that it started as. Not only did it get bigger, but it also changed as it developed. Characteristic number 5 is response to surroundings. Living things are going to respond to things that are going on around them. The change that causes the response is called a stimulus, and how you react is the response. So some more examples that you can write into your notes. Plants, actually, even though you don't really think of plants as moving around too much, plants can actually move. They will turn towards the rain. If you ever see a tree right before rain is coming, they look a lot lighter in color. That's because the leaves have actually turned over so that the bottom of the leaf is up to allow for more of the water to get into the plant. Also, plants can grow towards the sun. They can reset themselves or change the position they are in. When I went to Italy years ago, you'd wake up in the morning and all of the sunflowers were facing one direction. But as the sun moved through the sky during the day, we'd come back in the afternoon and that same field of flowers now was pointing in a totally different direction. So they can actually turn on their stem, or they can actually bend towards the light to grow towards it. And they're responding to that light, which is the stimulus. Animals, some of our response, we flinch. If someone pinches you, you kind of jerk away. The pinch would be the stimulus. The moving away or the flinching is the response. Sometimes we cry, whether we're hurt, could be a stimulus, or maybe a sad movie is a stimulus. The crying is the response. We can run, we can scream. Sometimes when we're cold, we get goosebumps, or even when we're scared, we get goosebumps. These are all examples of responding to your surrounding. Here I included two. The top young man is crying because he fell down, he hurt himself. Again, the cut or hurting himself is the stimulus, and the crying is the response. And down at the bottom we have the one little girl tickling the boy on his feet. The tickling is the stimulus, and his laughing is the response. The last characteristic of life that determines whether you are living or not is going to be reproduction. Reproduction is the ability to produce more of your own kind. So the word offspring in the notes, that means children. So they're going to be similar children. You're not going to have a dog that gives birth to a cat. So it's producing more of your own kind. Some examples you can note in your the notes that you're taking. Plants can reproduce by either seeds or by spores. We're actually going to learn about both of these when we talk about the plant kingdom, third 9 weeks. Reproducing by seeds is an example of sexual reproduction, which means to form a seed, you have to have a female part of a plant and a male part of a plant, and that will produce egg and sperm, which when it fertilizes, turns into a seed, and that seed we plant, and it then grows into a new plant, or a flower, or a tree. Animals have 2 types of reproduction. We can reproduce both sexually, or some animals reproduce asexually. For sexual reproduction, you must have a male and a female with the egg and the sperm. That fertilizes, and the new animal develops, or the baby animal develops from that. When we talk about asexual reproduction, third 9 weeks, when we talk about sponges, sponges are an animal that reproduce asexually. They will form another little sponge off of them. It's called a bud, and that's a form, that little bud that grows off of them will grow into a new sponge. That is asexual reproduction. Here in this picture, on the left-hand side, we have a panda with a baby. This is an example of sexual reproduction in animals. The right side picture is a picture of a sunflower. And if you look at the bottom one, that's a close-up of the center of the flower, which is where the seeds are produced, and these seeds are produced through sexual reproduction in a plant. Now, the 6 characteristics that we just went through, whether it was cellular organization, energy use, the chemicals of life, responding to your stimulus, growing, developing, reproducing, all 6 of these characteristics are needed to determine whether or not you are living. To be considered living, a living organism, you must display all 6 of these characteristics. If you are missing 1 or 2 of them, you do not fall into the category of living. Now, once we determine if something is a living thing or an organism, there are certain requirements that living things have to have. So these requirements are energy, water, living space, and stable internal conditions. So to stay alive, you must have all 4 of these things. The first is the need for energy. Energy is used to carry out all sorts of life processes, and there should be room in your notes to write down these words plus their definitions. Some of the life processes that we do carry on as a living thing, you'll see the first 3 actually have to do with our digestive system. The first is ingestion, which is taking in the nutrients, that would be eating. Then we have to digest, which is breaking down the food to pull out the nutrients that will then travel to our cells and be broken up to give us energy. We excrete. Excretion is the removal of waste products. When you poop, or defecate, the proper scientific word, you are removing all the waste products that you couldn't digest. So your poop is just undigested food. We also go through gas exchange, And there are two types of gas exchange depending on what you are. We can have respiration or photosynthesis. But that gas exchange is taking oxygen and taking carbon dioxide and swapping them out. For animals, we breathe in oxygen, we breathe out carbon dioxide. But for plants, plants are just the opposite. They take in carbon dioxide and they give off oxygen, which we need. And like earlier in the notes, the main source of energy for all living organisms is the sun. Plants are going to get the sun's energy directly by absorbing it right into their leaves, and they're going to produce a food source. It's called glucose, and that's a type of sugar, and that's the carbohydrate that it will then break down for energy. The energy that we use as humans, or just I should say as animals, that comes from the plants that we eat, and we're getting that energy which is trapped in those sugars, and that energy had originally come from the sun. Our second need is water. Water helps organisms in many, many different ways. It helps us get chemicals from our surroundings. It helps us circulate food. It helps us digest our food. It helps us remove waste from our body, and that again is through excretion. And it also is used by some organisms to grow and reproduce. There are some living things that require water for the sperm to be able to reach the egg so that fertilization can take place so that we can make more young. Now, ways in which animals and plants can obtain water, these examples you can write in your notes. Plants absorb water through their roots, and animals can get water through both eating and drinking. And I know you're thinking, well, I don't eat a whole lot of water, but a lot of the foods that you eat, things like lettuce, if you like watermelon, pears, apples, they have a high content of water in them, so you are getting water in that fashion. Our third need is living space, and you can see here in the picture, I've even circled him because he's actually very well hidden in that tree, is a little squirrel. So that tree is the living space for that squirrel. We all need space, and that space is where we get our food, we have our water, and it also provides shelter for us to protect us. The last need that living things must have is homeostasis, which is maintaining our stable internal conditions. Your body on the inside has certain requirements that it must meet. You have a certain temperature you stay at. Your body has to function certain ways. You need a certain amount of water in your body. And maintaining these conditions is called homeostasis. So the examples I give you below are ones that you can write in your notes. The first one that I put down are barnacles, and I'll show you a picture of what a barnacle looks like on the next slide. But these barnacles must have water to live, and sometimes they will grow and attach their shell to the side of a dock. And when the tide lowers and they're now out of the water, they must have a way to close that shell off to keep water inside to keep them alive. And then when the tide rises back up, then they open back up and let fresh water in. Animals, like you, need to maintain body temperature. That's an example of homeostasis. We have a 98.6 temperature, and to be able to maintain this, we can either sweat or we can shiver depending on what it's like around us. When we're out playing in the summer, our body sweats. That water evaporates off of us, cooling us down and bringing our temperature back down. In the winter, when we're cold, we shiver. That shivering motion generates heat and brings our body temperature back up to what it needs to be. And if your body temperature gets too low or gets too high, then we have problems. So we must have a way to be able to maintain our temperature. In this last slide of the presentation, the top picture here is a barnacle. The first picture shows it kind of out of its shell. You can see the little feathery structures, and that's the actual animal that lives in the shells that are in the picture to the right. And the picture to the right, all of those barnacles are closed because it's low tide. That means the water is lower than they are, so they're exposed to the air, so they close that shell off so that they can keep water inside their shell to keep them alive until the tide washes back over them. The bottom picture here is a tennis player. It's a close-up of the tennis player so you can see the sweat dripping off of his face. But to be able to cool down, to get his temperature back to what it should be, that he doesn't overheat, his body does sweat, and that allows him to cool down.